Want entertainment designed just for you? Then check out customizable streaming TV from Xfinity. It makes your life simple, easy, awesome.
Xfinity gives you customizable streaming TV options. Enjoy the most free shows anywhere on any device, and even access your streaming apps right on your TV with X1. Go to Xfinity.com, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit a store today to learn more. Restrictions apply.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aquarian Radio at aquarianradio.com. And I'm your host, Janet Kierlesson, and my co-host today is we have Karen Christine Patrick and Reverend John Polk. And our very special guest is Barbara Harris, who is a upcoming speaker at the event in early June, first weekend of June, called Contact in the Desert. Karen, are you there? Do you want to read a little bit about Barbara for our listeners?
I don't have that in front of me all of a sudden. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do that, and then we'll go to say hi to you and John, and then we'll focus on Barbara. Barbara Harris is a local historian who has researched giant rock and the Integratron for Integratron for well over 30 years. As a former president of the Morongo Basin Historical Society, she has combined her business skills in computer graphics with her knowledge of the desert into a unique form of storytelling. When she is not out roaming the desert, you can catch her doing volunteer work for local nonprofits and presenting lectures about the folklore and legends of the desert. And her website is giantrockproject.com. And this is from the New York Times. In the wee hours of August 24th, 1953, George Van Tassel, a 43-year-old former aviation engineer, was awakened by a man from outer space. 6 years earlier, Van Tassel had moved with his family to Landers, California, a place of stark beauty and rainbow sunsets in the southeastern corner of the Mojave Desert, 40 desolate miles due north of Palm Springs. Van Tassel had the clean-cut look of a mid-century company man and a resume to match. He had worked for Lockheed and Douglas Aircraft and for Howard Hughes' aviation concerns, but his spiritual leanings were esoteric. He settled in Landers because of its proximity to Giant Rock, an enormous 7-story-high desert boulder in whose shadow he could sit silently for hours at a stretch. He told friends that he went to Giant Rock to commune with the spirits of American Indians who regarded the boulder as sacred. Before we bring on Barbara, I'd like to introduce to our listeners our co-hosts, Karen Christine Patrick and Reverend John Polk. Karen, you speak first.
Oh, yes, yeah. I was excited to find out more about this facility and Barbara, and seems like we got some common with a computer background and volunteering for nonprofits. I do that too. And Brett and I have often talked about the Georges. There's George Adamski, George Van Tassel, and I forgot the other George, but they're very important contactees that people should learn. Those cases are really great. So that's my input for now.
Oh, thank you. John, before we bring on Karen or Barbara. Hi.
Hey,
John.
Barbara. This is Reverend John Polk. How are you?
Hi. Hi. Okay.
Anyway, I wanted to mention that some good friends of mine that I met at some other conferences and we've had on the show here on Aquarian Radio. Their names are Dave Cruz and Les Johnson III and Gigi Brian Bressler. I met Brian Bressler, or more affectionately known as Gigi, at the Big Bear Alien Snowfest back in February of this year. And he introduced me to Dave Cruz, who is the founder and host of Beyond the Strange, which is a great radio show. But they're going to be at this conference. They're going to be at Contact in the Desert, along with Les Johnson III, who is also a co-producer for Beyond the Strange, and Jimmy Church's Fade to Black. And they're actually going to be doing a show on that particular Sunday, I guess on the first weekend of June. And if you and Janet have occasion, they're incredibly great contacts to have in our field, and just some good people. So if you have a chance, introduce yourselves to them and just tell them that you were on this show and that maybe you'd like to be on their show as well.
I love that. Yeah, I just did a show with Jimmy. Actually, I've done them consecutively for the last couple of years. And so and he also is going to be at Contact in the Desert. He also is one of the speakers this year too. So it's this Contact in the Desert is an amazing conference that has come together, because we're going on our 4th year. And being out here in the desert, I remember when it first started 4 years ago, we kind of put it together, and you had a thought of going, well, who's going to come to a conference in the middle of the desert? And we had it in August the first year, and that was the first thing you think of, like, who's going to come to the desert in August? And we were just stunned at the interest in how many people really the support was overwhelming. So, and it has grown immensely over the years, and now it's considered like one of the top conferences for UFO information. And of course, the speaker agenda is amazing. We have like Giorgio Tsoukalos, Eric Van Doniken, David Wilcock, George Norrie, the David Child. It just goes on and on. I mean, the list is just amazing. But the thing that I'd really like to share with people is, because you have this conference called Contact in the Desert, and you often say, like, why come here to the desert? That's the real interesting part. And why here in the Mojave Desert? And it has a lot of interest of why coming here, and that's part of what I deal with. I'm sorry? I'm getting some feedback.
Sorry. Me too.
Is that okay?
There's something going on here. I'm just going to mute.
Okay. But
okay, keep going.
Okay, because the one thing that is an interesting background to this whole area, and as you read earlier, the history of George Van Tassel, and in that one of the things that I talk about is where he had his conferences out in this part of the desert. There's this boulder called Giant Rock, and it was recognized very much by the natives of this area as a very sacred spot. And over time now, it has been even measured by scientists, and the vorticity in that area is very strong. But over time, in George Van Tassel's story, his story is very interesting, because once he moved to Giant Rock, he had an encounter with spaceships, a spaceship that came from Venus, as he proclaims, and when it came down, they basically had told him information that, hey, you humans, you're coming along okay as a society, as a species. However, it seems by the time you get to the age where you finally get it, you die. So what these encounters he had with these beings from Venus had, and what they told him, is they wanted to give him some information, some knowledge on how to build this machine called the Integratron. And the Integratron was a machine that was going to help the human species to heal and to live longer. And it has a whole history in itself of being kind of an energy machine. So that's kind of how this whole area got kind of started out there. And what was really interesting too, that this giant boulder out there in the middle of the desert, that this was all going on. Eventually, this was all going on in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and you would have as many as 15,000 people migrating to this area in the middle of the desert to go to spacecraft conventions where people like George Van Tassel and other contactees, I heard George Adamski's name mentioned earlier, and he was one of the first contactees also to speak at these conventions. You had people like Gabriel Green. You could go on to all these original contactee people, and it was an opportunity for people to come out there and speak, and I often call it like they were able to come out of the closet, because during that particular time in history, people were still so afraid of talking about, anything in this realm, especially with government issues and things that were going on. So this gave people an opportunity to come together with like mind and to talk and to experience things. And what was so unique about it, being out there in the middle of this desert area, is they were having actual contact and experiences happen to them out there. So, the history goes very wide and very deep, and it has a lot to do with, where this particular area of the Mojave Desert is situated, too. So it's kind of unique. So does anybody have any questions, or would you just like me to continue more with my history?
I wanted to make a comment. This is Janet. I guess we should identify ourselves because we have all these voices.
Yes. I
actually went to Giant Rock after a Prophet conference back in early, late the 1990s, early 2000s.
Okay.
No, it was probably the late 1990s to around the year 2000, right? And John Mack was at that conference, and then a group of us went over to, Giant Rock, and we were, well, what's the big deal about a rock, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it cracked at one point, and so I was there. It was amazing. Now I know the significance of it, but back then I was just kind of naive, like, well, I don't know what this is about. But I went in the test building, I guess, and you can sit, you can go, like, there's a little part in the second floor where you can kind of sit down in there. And when you sit in there, it's very magical. It sounds like you have a mic, and you're able to project and talk to, a giant stadium of 200,000 people, right? But it only sounds like that to you when you're in there. So when you go back out to the room, it's normal acoustics. I don't know exactly what the meaning of that is. Once again, I was young and naive and didn't know what all this was about. But it's a very magical place, though. And they were saying that somebody used to live under the rock. Who was that lived under the rock?
Yes. See, this is all part of the history. Where you went and what you experienced was the Integratron. And the Integratron was the reason George Van Tassel existed. It was what he built because of the conferences. And I'm gonna back up. I'm going to give you the history. I'm going to give you how as a historian and my story behind it and part of my research. Mm-hmm. It all started, actually, this rock, and most people go out there, this rock sits out in the desert, the middle of the desert, and it is 7 stories tall. It's about 25,000 tons, and it was once considered the largest freestanding boulder in the world, okay? So it is a really big, heavy rock just sitting out there. And the Native Americans, we don't have a particular tribe native to this area. However, our nomadic tribes, when they would travel, they would stop at the rock and conduct their ceremonies there. And only the shamans or the chiefs of the tribe were able to stay at the rock, and the tribesmen had to stay, several miles away because they considered this rock so sacred. And over time, eventually, the white man moved into the area. This now we're jumping up to the 1800s, and there was a man named Charlie Ricci. And Charlie Ricci was the first white man who lived in that area, and he was the first white man who was invited to share in these ceremonies with the natives. So as Charlie Ricci was there with the white men, eventually there was this other man who came along, and if you look him up on Google or anything, his name was Frank Kreitzer. And Frank Kreitzer, if you look him up, you're going to see a lot of history about him, saying that he was the man who came to Giant Rock. He was the first man who dug under the rock and made that his home. And and his story is very, very intense, because people recognize him and say that he had a German background, that he came out to Giant Rock because he was, a Nazi sympathizer. He had a lot of baggage, you might say, in a lot of areas. But his connection eventually came that he was not from Germany, as many of the things you'll read on the internet are about. He was actually born in the United States. He came from Virginia to Kansas, and from Kansas he made his way to California. And when he made his way to California, he actually met George Van Tassel in a garage in Santa Monica. And when he eventually met George Van Tassel in this garage, they kind of grub-staked him because his car wasn't working. And in grub-staking means that they gave him some money, they gave him some food, and they sent him on his way with the idea that someday, that whenever he made it big, they would pay him back. So this guy named Frank Kreitzer takes off, and he drives out into the desert. He was going to be a prospector. And he dug under the rock. He made that his home. And he also built an airstrip out there, an airport, and he made all these roads that led to the rock. So, and eventually there's a lot of articles about Frank Kreitzer that say that, there were tear gas, these sheriffs that came to his place and threw tear gas canisters underneath the rock and blew him up. But the story is a lot more involved in that. He actually eventually committed suicide. And after Frank Kreitzer's demise and he got blown up underneath the rock, that is when George Van Tassel eventually moved out to Giant Rock. And that was actually George Van Tassel actually picked up his family in 1947, and he picked up his wife Ava and 3 daughters, and they all moved out to that big rock out in the desert, and they called that home. And while they were out there at the rock and making that their home, that's when George Van Tassel had his experience with the spaceship, and then after he had his experience with the spaceship, he had to raise funds in order to build the Integratron. And one of the ways he was to raise the funds was to have those spaceship conventions and to publish a little newsletter that he sent out every month. So it's quite a very intense, very long story, and it's one of the things I go into very, very detailed at Contact in the Desert. And one of the things that I also do at Contact in the Desert, I'll be taking people on tours and taking them out there and giving them a more detailed, background of it.
Are there any pictures of the UFOs? Did anybody, back then have a camera that was capturing this on film, or with George Van Tassel?
No, not of the particular one that George Van Tassel talks about. No, there is not a photograph. However, there are photographs of UFOs that people at the conventions have captured, and there's one in particular that is very popular. It's also, too, you can go up online. It was taken by a Riverside County sheriff, and they did all kinds of evaluations during that time. You know, you got to remember going back. They had Polaroids and they still processed with film. So
right.
the people and things weren't that readily available at that time. But people do. I still talk to some old-timers and people that attended those conventions, and they'll have photographs of what they call UFOs. However, I kind of look at it and go, I think that's more of a smudge or dirt or something. You know, being a little bit more sophisticated with photography equipment today, we can be a little bit more discerning. But, however, an interesting thing happened to me personally just last year. I was in Joshua Tree. I was at a local railroad museum. My husband, a friend of mine, and we were at this local museum, and my friend was taking photographs, and in one of the photographs, she's shooting pictures, and I'm out here in the middle of the desert. Okay, we're out here next to Joshua Tree. This is where we are, and she lives closer to L.A. And when she got home, she emailed me and sent me her photographs that she took. And when I pulled them up and I started looking at the photographs, I emailed her back. I texted her back and I said, "Ha ha, nice thing, photoshopping a UFO in the photo." And she texts back and she goes, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" And in one of the photos, in between all the photos she sent, there's this UFO right in the middle of the photograph. And
wow.
And of course, when we saw it, we immediately went into action and then started, getting it evaluated. What was the camera at? What was the speed? Where was it taken? And we had it, analyzed and totally looked at. And everybody that saw it said, "Yep, can't explain it." And in fact, the consensus that came back, that they said that it had that it looked like a scout ship, like the Adamski scout ship that you usually see the Adamski ship with, and that was the consensus with it, and it's pretty cool, and so for me, being a historian, I'm somewhat a believer. However, there's always that part of my brain that always goes, and I kind of always want to see the facts. I always kind of want proof somehow deep down inside of me. I'm not always easily convinced, but I got to tell you that having these things like the photograph pop up and having some of the experiences we've had at Contact in the Desert happen, you can't. It's just amazing. There's no other questions about it. As somebody who's very discerning about what I see in the night sky, there's been things that have happened out here that are, I don't have any, answers to. And it's been very, especially Contact in the Desert, when over the past several years, we've had, all these wonderful science and people who are very knowledgeable with regards to UFOs and the studies and the research behind the UFO, backgrounds and stuff. And And I'm a local historian. So, I have all this fabulous history, and I've had all this wonderful stuff that have happened here locally. And but yet, I still tell people to be open-minded and realize that, we're next to a Marine base, and when you see different things, and, I'm always going to that. But we had something happen. One of the nights we took a tour out to Giant Rock at Contact in the Desert, and I had James Gillian. I don't know. Do you know him? Has anybody met him?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I had James Gillian with me on one of the trips, and it was one of the last trips of the whole weekend. And we're out there at Giant Rock, and you have to imagine these night skies in the desert are beautiful. We're kind of suspended out there, and they can be very quiet. They could be very dark and very, just a beautiful open night sky. And at one point there was this thing moving up in the sky, and people pointed up to the sky, and he pointed up, and he goes, "Oh, look, there's one there now." And of course, me in my usual, way, I'll say, yes, that it could be, but it looks more like a satellite. And then he pulls out his little laser, and he goes, "No, it's not." And he points up to it with his little laser beam, and he holds it there, and he holds it there a few seconds, and he's like, like moving his hand a little bit with a laser, and all of a sudden he goes, power up. And he says, "Power up," and the thing just starts pulsating. And it's poof, 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 and it gets brighter and brighter. And, we're all just, I'm standing there going, "Oh, my God, holy crap." Yeah, wow, sure, okay. And everybody, the rest of the people on the tour are all going for their cameras. And then he looks over and he goes, "Look, there's another one." And, and I kind of look over and I go, "Wow, okay." My heart's going, "Okay, yeah, oh, wow." And then I look over, and as he points to the other one in the sky, it stops dead in the sky. It just stops, and it starts moving backwards. So,
wow.
So those are just like kind of things that have happened, and and for me, that it validates. It's things for me that allow me to validate my research, because these things, like when George Van Tassel talks about the ships that came down, and also too, then I go into the local records of reading what happened in the 1950s in this local area, and the local sightings, the sightings of UFOs in this local area were so common. It was just so commonplace when you do the research and you talk to the people, that they actually published them in newspapers. And they had monthly newspapers that would let people talk about their sightings and talk about their own experiences. It's just an amazing.
Seems like we've gone backwards.
Yeah, it's just been amazing. Yeah. So, and
well, I'm looking at these lovely pictures of from the 50s, and I guess you can find them online. The ones at the 1968 convention, you can look at them. And it has the groups that gathered there. It looks like they were having a lot of fun. Then I see that the giant rock cracked, and now it seems like there's just graffiti all over it. Any comments on that? And we should let John ask a question before I ask to go. But go ahead and comment on that, and we'll have John speak.
Yeah,
after you're done.
The graffiti is an issue. And that's one of the reasons I became, and I got involved with the Historical Society, and I got involved very much with a lot of the politics, you might say, in the area, because I really thought, and I was looking for ways of keeping it clean, of how we can preserve and do things for this particular rock. find that it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. We do have regular cleanings that go on. However, the land is considered public land, and it is. There's not a whole lot you can do with people just going out there and it's the Wild West. And all we can do at this part is to educate and to let people know through like these types of interviews on radio, and let people know that this is a sacred area, and let people know the history that has transpired there, and maybe do something over the years. I've been involved now for close to really with keeping it going and really helping it, saving it, I'd say for the last 15 years. And I've seen a lot improve over that period of time. But it's a very slow process, and, like I said, it's always an uphill battle. And the graffiti, we go out there and do graffiti cleanup, and no sooner you have it cleaned up, it's right back there the next weekend. So, all we can do is just keep trying and educating and letting people know that, we don't really like this. So, and many of the people come from out of the area. That's one of the issues. That's why reaching out through radio and all kinds of methods that we can do is always helpful. So, did you have any questions?
I wanted John a chance, and then Karen will be your turn. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Hey, once again, Barbara. I got a few comments, some things I find kind of interesting looking through your website. Interestingly enough, that George Van Tassel, he went out to the area in 1947, of all years, 1947,
yeah.
The same year as Roswell, New Mexico, the same year as the sightings in Mount Rainier, where a local newspaper reporter coined the term flying saucer. Also, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947. Also, Navy Admiral Byrd flew into the center of the Earth in that hole in the middle of Antarctica, which was chronicled just recently on last Friday's Ancient Aliens, which was a magnificent show. I don't know if anybody saw it or not, but it was really, really good. And Linda Moulton Howe did an investigative piece on the show about that hole. But anyway, it all goes back to the year 1947, so I don't think that was a coincidence at all. Also, I was going to ask you to ask Giorgio Tsoukalos to do a show on Giant Rock. I mean, y'all are there, you're in Joshua Tree, Giant Rock, that whole area. It's just screaming for a TV show. I'm sure you would agree. I'm sure some other producers and directors have done some kind of documentary on it before, but I think that Ancient Aliens, it would be just perfect to do a show on Ancient Aliens regarding Giant Rock. And then also I was interested in some of the mysteries, legends, and folklore of that area. I know we don't have enough time before I have to go, but here's my question. Can you tell us about the sign of the scorpion? And if I don't get a chance to chime in again, it was very great to talk to you and listen to your research. Sounds like you're very thorough and that it's important to you. It's part of your spirit now. And my house is on an Indian reservation, so I can relate to the whole vortex thing going on, as I have one right here in my house. But so my question is, can you explain to us the sign of the scorpion?
Oh yes. Oh, that scorpion. There is a sign of the scorpion on Giant Rock, and it was put there by the last chief, the last shaman at the rock to conduct the ceremony. And the scorpion means that this is a sacred spot. It is a place of healing. And many people did not even know, and still don't know, that scorpion is there. And it is being very weathered now over the years and being weathered away. And I don't, for many, many years, I knew where it was. I know where it is on the rock, and I present it in my presentations. And I was very cautious for many years. I just didn't want people to know. And but now that it is fading, I just, as part of my program to educate people, to let them know, I just feel that this is so important that they know that the Native Americans of this area recognize this rock and recognize this space as sacred long before we, white men, were even here. And we've got to go back to this time now of recognizing it as sacred. So I felt that it was part of me to I felt that the people who would really acknowledge it and respect it would hold it dearly, and I think that it's worked in some ways since adding the scorpion to part of my program. Now it seems like it has reached people, and it has also helped in the aspect of saving the rock, because I do believe that it would have met its demise many years prior if I have not brought more education out with that at this time. And one thing I do want to comment on, this rock, it has become just so part of me that sometimes I almost want to scream. I almost feel like Richard Dreyfuss in the movie, when he's building the Devil's Tower out of the mashed potatoes, because every time I try to even just say, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just tired. It's been over 30 years of my life, and every time I feel like I want to just quit and walk away from it or don't do this anymore, I'm just, it takes a lot, and especially with some of it dealing with government aspects of trying to save the rock and education of the rock and doing some different aspects that I've gotten into. It drains you, and I want to walk away sometimes. And every time I do that, something happens. Like just something as magnificent as a UFO showing up in a picture. Just reminding me that there's things going on out there that I don't know about, and I just need to continue to follow my gut and to follow what's inside of me. And I actually, moving here to this desert, I don't want to say it was totally for the rock, but we lived in Orange County, like in the LA area on the coast. We had a vibrant brick and mortar advertising business, my husband and I, and we would drive out to this desert, just to work at the Integratron in Giant Rock and be part of this energy out here. We would come out and spend like 4 days here, drive back to the coast. We did that for 2 years at a time, and we actually just picked up our lives and moved here. It was such a calling to be part of this. So that's what I mean. It's I don't tell, it's become part of me and part of our life now. So thank you for the question. That was nice. And not many people know about the scorpion, so I hope I answered that.
Oh, you did.
Great.
Perfect.
Karen probably has something she wants to say. She's been so quiet.
Just going off that last bit about the desert. I'm from, I lived many, many years in the Pacific Northwest, so I lived by the water just like you were, and life circumstance plot me here in the desert in New Mexico. And for a UFO interested person, I'm pretty much in Mecca, I think. I'm not far. I'm so close to Roswell, I get their, car company advertisements on the radio, which I thought was pretty cool. And the desert's just, there's so much that goes on. We've got very clear skies out here. When I first bought the car that I have right now, we found that we had we call it a moon roof. We don't call it a sun roof. We do like to look at the stars and the moon. We looked right up out of it for the first time. We're kind of looking up, and all of a sudden we see what we think is a satellite, and it does have 90-degree turn. So I thought, okay, we're home. And if you were going to be sky watching with anybody, I have to say James Gilliland's a guy. Anybody listening to the sound of my voice, if you get a chance to go sky watching with James Gilliland, please do that. I went out to East Eddy Ranch before, and this guy knows how to sky watch, and I believe he calls them down to a certain extent. Basically, out in East Eddy Ranch, if you visit there, you kind of can tell where the Portland to Seattle, airplanes are. So you know if you see something in a different part of the sky, it's not that, airplane route. And then they track the satellites, so they know how to, weed out what the satellites are. And night after night after night in the warmer months, where they've got a clear sky, they're in Troutdale, Washington. James is pointing stuff out to people, and you're standing out in the field with, 50 people, and he's got that little laser pointer, and he goes, there's one, and he does that power-up thing. It's like he asks them to, and they do that. And it was like, after I went to East Eddy Ranch for like the whole rest of that summer, that was my summer of the UFOs. I must have gone into their frequency or whatever, but I saw 30, 40, I don't know how many it was by the end of summer. And it's pretty exciting, and I've now got to the point where I can actually kind of draw them too. What I do, and there's different protocols, and you can hook up with some organizations where they do sky watching, the CE5 people, Contact Underground with Dr. Joseph Burks, they do this too. And, for me, I just, I imagine the top of my head is like an imaginary laser pointer, and I say, here I am, and thank you ahead of time if you show up. And, within about an hour or two, I can get about 2 or 3 unusual things that you pretty much can tell aren't, an airplane or a satellite. And clear skies help a lot. Desert skies help a lot because they're very clear, and they don't have as much light pollution as you would when you get around the cities.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Very much. The other thing that happens, too, is I think a group consciousness helps, too. And that's one of the things we found that when, especially like this group, when the Contact in the Desert comes together, James and different people each night, they'll do a call-in. They'll call them in. And so that'll happen. But I take my little small groups out to this giant rock out in the middle of the desert. So we'll only have maybe like 20 or 30 people sitting out there in our lawn chairs, sitting out there with some night sky vision or, just, a couple bottles of water, and we're just quiet. And things just happen out there. And I can't say it's always quiet because, like I said earlier, we do share the land with, other people, and there could be people, riding ATVs and, shooting guns and different things going on. But, for the most part, you're still getting night skies that are dark, and they're beautiful. And I do want to make one comment. John earlier made a comment about the year 1947, and I want to make a comment about, in particular, where this boulder sits with regards to the longitude and the latitude of the Earth's grids, because Joshua Tree and the Giant Rock area is really, really close to the 33rd north latitude. Does anybody know anything about that? Have you heard about that?
I do.
Okay,
yeah, I sure do.
And so we sit, and I think there was just recently also on Ancient Aliens, I think yesterday, or I think my husband told me that Giorgio did a whole thing on the 33rd. But we're very much on the 33rd or very close to it, where we share that energy. And for those who don't know, the 33rd north latitude has the most sightings of UFOs on that north grid. The number 33 itself is a very auspicious number. It relates a lot to the Freemasons. The number itself, I'm going to give you you have 33 muscles in your foot. You have 33 DNA sequence in the human DNA. King David lived 33 years in Jerusalem. Jesus Christ died and lived 33 years. So that number alone is very auspicious. But then if you go off back to the 33rd north latitude, some of the things I like to share with people, because that latitude we're on the same latitude as Roswell. It also shares the Phoenix Lights, the pyramids of Giza, the Bermuda Triangle. You have and other cities and things that and states and countries that you might find interesting on a 33rd north latitude. You have Syria, Libya, the India, China, Japan, and some of the other things like you have the dropping of Hiroshima, the bombs. I mean, this number of the 33 and all of its interesting background is, and all the energy it shares is a whole story and a whole background all in itself. So it's very significant, and I think that's one of the other reasons why contact in the desert and in this giant rock, and we all share in a lot of the same energy that is encircling the earth at this point. So again, the numbers, and nothing's a coincidence, so interesting, huh? So
great.
Hey ladies, please forgive me, I have to break away. I'm going to be on KCOR coming up
Excellent.
here any time now. Yeah, Tina Marie is gonna Skype me in here shortly. But KCOR, Divine Paradigm, Dr. Sasha Lesson and Janet Lesson have a show every Tuesday, so thought I'd throw in a plug for them. And also on the 33rd parallel is Mount Hermon, where the fallen angels descended to Earth. So funny you brought that up.
It could go on and on, because
I know.
It's like I have like a list here of all the things that have happened on the 33rd north parallel, and it just you have John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas on the 33rd. His brother, the Ambassador Hotel, he was killed on the 33rd parallel.
Wow.
The interesting thing now, this is what I find interesting. The nuclear bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were both on the 33rd parallel, but the actual bomb itself was designed as the 33rd president, Harry S. Truman, was the guy who, ushered in the nuclear age. And Trinity, New Mexico was on the 33rd parallel, is where the nuclear bomb was first tested. So
wow, you have a book there with all the 33s.
It's really crazy when you start putting just any kind of little things together about just how the whole energy of just one parallel and how it all shares. And people ask, well, what's so big? Why do you think the 33rd parallel? What is all it about? And I don't know, but to me it seems like it could be an area that is more of an access, that it might be a magnetic line that maybe allows aircraft to move in and out easy. It just it might be just one big vortex that allows spaceships and things to move in and out very easily. I don't know. It would be really interesting to do a lot more research onto that. But that's something maybe Giorgio and the other guys in the talk can do more than I can. So, but I just thought I'd bring that up for interesting point of reference. Yeah. So
wonderful.
But anybody else have?
Yeah, Karen,
anyway, I'll just say good night, ladies. It was a pleasure to talk to you, Barbara, and learn more about you and all the history. I love history, and you laid it out in such a way that it made it even more interesting. So anyway, great show, and glad I was able to be a part of it. And I'll look forward to doing more research on you and your research. So good night, ladies.
Check out Giant Rock Project. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay. Hi. Karen, what would you like to add?
Oh, yeah, the 33rd parallel thing. My partner Brett and I work with moon information, so moon anomalies, and Richard Hoagland had in his book Dark Mission, which is a must-read for anyone who wants to know the deep darks about NASA and the moon missions. And he gets into a couple chapters of the esoteric, the deep esoteric information, including the Freemasonic information about the 33rd parallel as well. And of course, one of the top levels of a Mason is the 33rd degree. So I would encourage people, and basically he and some other researchers are pointing out that that the energetics, like there's like a geometric energetic underlying our planet, not just our planet, it's the moon and Mars, the sun, all have a basic energetic understructure, like in the energetic realm. And we have this whole area that people can research called sacred geometry. And the ancient people, even crop circles are constantly showing us aspects of sacred geometry, I think the crop circles, they're trying to tell us some truths that, would have us move into free energy. If we understood what they're trying to tell us in crop circles and the ancients were, trying to tell us about energy and subtle energy, we would really transform our whole planet and probably would achieve space travel. But we kind of have a paradigm that keeps this stuff under wraps. But fortunately, I think the lid's being blown off. I was just sitting here thinking about how much I really appreciate George Tsoukalos and David Hatcher Childress and the gang over at Ancient Aliens for. I mean, when I can talk about this stuff with my mom, and she's watching it, and my daughter's watching it, and we get on the phone and we chat about it and learn so much. And I learn about this stuff, but I still learn something every time I watch one of those shows. They do such a good job researching it. And I'm in the desert. We're not too far from Roswell. We have the Dulce base. We've got a lot of things happening on that parallel as well. And, it just behooves people to dig a little deeper. As much as I love Ancient Aliens, I'm not a big TV watcher. Get on the Internet. Get on, I would throw this one out. I'm on have a group called the Earth Anomaly Research Society on Facebook. We're really close to having 5,000 people. We're coming up on that number. This is exactly what we like to talk about is pyramids and strange, underground things. There's a lot of underground stuff that people don't know about. Again, also on that parallel, as a matter of fact. There's the belief in an Earth grid or a ley line system that what a couple of researchers have pointed out that hello.
Hello.
The circus came to town.
Be quiet.
She has the most lively ringtone. If you look at this ley line, this ley line, Leyline, if people look that up, I would not be surprised if your rock wasn't on there, is that there's giant structures, megalithic stones, churches that have been built on top of older structures that run on these ley lines, and one of the lines, of course, is that 33rd degree parallel. So there's these energetic bands, like you were saying, vortexes line up with where some of these ley lines cross, right? And, that's where we get sacred geometry. That's where we get this information. And there's a lot of this that people tend to, we're all busy with their lives. Personally, for me, this is my fun. My fun is to go look that stuff up. And you believe me, I'm going to be checking out giantrockproject.com. Is that what it is? project. Super.
Yeah,
I'm definitely looking that up.
Yeah, actually, my website, it's a little bit weak, but the thing on Facebook is what I actually been posting quite a bit of information.
Oh, great.
And you'll have stories of George Van Tassel actually talking. We have drones that fly over Giant Rock. We have people, reporting cleanups at Giant Rock, where we're doing different things like that happening there.
That's great.
You talked about sacred geometry. The neat thing about the Integratron that is all made up of the sacred geometry and the way that is built. The complete thing of the Integratron was a complete wooden frame that was built in a tongue and groove manner, like shipbuilders. It had no metal in it when it was built originally, and it was originally like 38 foot high and 58 foot in diameter. And again, that thing, he didn't know where he was building it, and when he built it on 3 converging aquifers underneath the middle of that Integratron, and that alone, just having that out there in the middle of the desert is magnificent. That, creating the vortex of that. So, and what that was eventually going to do, that was going to rotate and create an electrostatic generator almost. I'm starting to lose my voice, and that, that's just another whole story in connection with Giant Rock and how that energy out there in the middle of the desert connects. It's like I said, again, those are just like small things that connect the desert together. And and we have again down the road from the Integratron and Giant Rock, we have the Joshua Tree Retreat Center, where the Contact in the Desert is being held. And that's like 420 acres with probably close to 18 vortexes on the property alone. And that has a magnificent history behind it also. So it's, this part of the desert, many people didn't realize that the things that were going on here in this little sleepy town, in this little sleepy area, were the same things that were going on, like I said, in Roswell, in other parts of the world. And I think in 1947, like John mentioned earlier, is when it was all starting to awaken. It was all starting to come awake. And for some reason, in my research and what I discovered, that it happened like in the late 1960s, early 1970s is when it all started falling asleep again, and that's what happened here to this area. It kind of all went to sleep until.
What do you think made that happen?
There
was this grand awakening, and then all of a sudden the repression.
I don't know. I really don't. I watch the cycles of how people. We become so mundane in our everyday life, and we just take things for granted. And again, it took the year 2000 before we started to, I think, awake again. So you look from how many years? That's almost another 30 years, or what? How many years?
Yeah.
There's a 30-year lull in between there, that people kind of just went about life asleep and not doing it. That's just kind of an interesting thing. I'd kind of like to investigate that more and kind of look into that. But that in the little bit of research that I have done, that's kind of where my research kind of ends. It kind of, for here anyway, it kind of stops. Like in, like it says in the mid-1970s, of where a lot of the UFO activity was so common, and it kind of stopped. They lost interest and stuff,
Something happened, yeah. Well, we're going to have to bookmark it for another time because we're out of time. Any final words? I can't went really fast.
Oh, well, I would hope that people would just, if they had any interest in Contact in the Desert, that's happening June 3rd through the 6th, and that is here in Joshua Tree, at Joshua Tree Retreat Center. If you want to learn more about that, you can go up online. And if you want to know a little bit more about the Giant Rock Project, you could check me out on Facebook and giantrockproject.com. I have some things on there. So and you can always, reach me. And if you have any other questions and want to know more about the Mojave Desert and some of the things we have going on here, I'm always available to answer your questions. So
lovely.
It was lovely talking to you all.
Barbara. Yeah, Barbara, I'm going to be at Contact in the Desert for my husband, Dr. Sasha Lesson, so we'll try to find you and say hi. And
come on
thank
on
you
one
so
of the
much
tours.
for coming today.
Yes,
that might be a possibility. Yes.
Yeah, I do tours from Thursday till Monday. So every night you'll see us.
Every night.
See us there. Okay.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you, Karen, for being with us today. And say goodbye to everybody, Karen.
Bye. Great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, and tell John said thank you to him too. So much love and blessings and aloha to everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again on Sunday on KCOR. Aloha.
Have you heard? Metro by T-Mobile now includes Amazon Prime. Yes, enjoy the best of shopping and entertainment, movies, TV shows, music, free shipping, and much more. All included for just $40 per line for 3 lines. All on the T-Mobile network. Discover the smarter way. Metro by T-Mobile. That's genius. One offer per account. Offer subject to change. $12.99 per month value. Offer valid for new Amazon Prime members. Metro customers may notice reduced speeds versus some T-Mobile customers. Video at 480p. Capable device required. See store for details and terms and conditions.